Now that you've completed the first beginner tutorial for Katana, we have a basis where we can replace the procedural metal texture with the actual textures to create this image, which is the bronze version of this lion statue. So let's get started. In order to update the scene with the provided textures from the USD Lights asset zip file, we need to add 2 additional nodes. First, hit Tab and type NET and create the network material create, and then hit Tab and type GR and create the group stack. The network material create is going to replace the material node, while the group stack is actually going to incorporate the material assign node. But before we do that, we want to make sure our monitor is in live render mode. To do that, hold Shift and click this first checkbox under live render. The second step is to go to DL settings, right click, and select live render. This will refresh the monitor, and this will be important because as we add the textures to the network material create node, we want to make sure we're both doing it correctly and it's actually applying, and we can get both of those pieces of information from the live render mode. Make sure it's actually working by changing perspective under the viewer to camera, and then just middle mouse drag it around. Okay, so that works. Control Z to put it back in place. And we're going to do all of our node setup before we actually add the textures. So disconnect the material and material assign. For the group stack node, we want to add the material assign. Before we do that, double click it, remove the existing information, so now we have basically a new node. Double click the group stack node, and then shift middle mouse button, material assign into the open area. The nice thing about the group stack, that even though there isn't a material assign stack, anytime you add additional nodes, it'll remember what you've already added. So if you hit the plus a couple of times, you get additional material assigns. Now we're only going to use 2, one for the background and one for the statue, so we can delete this third one, or however many you added. And we're going to rename everything first. So the group stack, click the group stack name, it'll highlight it, and we're going to rename this material assign stack. We're going to rename the first material assign by clicking this once. We're going to call this statue underscore MA. Click the second material assign node. Click the name and call this background, and I call my backgrounds BKGD underscore MA for material assign. Enter. Now, before we can actually assign the various elements, we have to create a materials. Double click the network material create. We already have one network material. We're going to add a second. Hit the plus. Hit add network material. We're going to rename both of these. Double click the first one. It's highlighted. We're going to call this statue underscore MAT. Double click the second one. I'm going to call this background underscore MAT. Enter. We've created both materials and both material assign nodes. We're going to link everything up so it'll get rid of the red here. Everything will show up back in our scene graph. And then once we start creating the actual materials, they'll show up in the live render view. Delete the old material. This is the old metal material. Move this into position. Drag the out to the in. So that's connected. If you notice, this material, network material create, doesn't have a in on the top. And that's because it has to be separate from the main tree. Highlight merge in network material create. Hit M on your keyboard. That'll merge it into the chain. Go from the out on the second merge to the material assign in. So now that's connected up. Position if you want, doesn't really matter. Everything's wired, but we have to again assign our materials to the material assign stack. For statue, drag, select statue material, and then drag the statue material under the materials in the scene graph to material assign. And then drag both the geo shape for the base and for my son, which is the lion. As you can see, you've highlighted them in the viewer. Middle mouse drag to add statements. So now these are associated. Now click the background material assign. Do the same thing for that. Click background material, middle mouse drag to material assign. Select the cyclo shape, middle mouse drag that to add statements. Now everything is hooked up as far as creating materials, material assign nodes, and then reconnecting everything to the main trunk. So now we just need to create our actual materials. This live render won't update yet because we've done so many changes. So we actually have to right click under DL settings, do live render again, and after a few seconds, now we can see that everything is connected. There are materials and there are material assigns, but we haven't actually added the materials to the material network create yet. If you zoom in on this node, you'll see this. This actually lets you jump into this folder, which holds all of your materials. So click this once. This takes you in to the area where you can actually create your materials that are already assigned to the various geometries in the scene. But this isn't really enough area to work with. So with your mouse over this main area, hit the space bar, and now you have the full screen view of this node. We're going to create two principled shaders. Hit Tab, DLP, click Principled. It's connected to the background material. Now we're going to create a second one. Tab, DLP. We're going to wire this in place. Out color to DL surface. You can just click the little circle and then drag mouse over here. You can disconnect by grabbing it and just dropping it. So click, hold, drag, connects. Now we actually have to add the various qualities for the background. And as you can see, DL principled, we want to rename these. You can rename these nodes two different ways. The easiest way is to right click and click show parameters in floating pane. If you don't do it that way and you just hit the space bar, you can always do it like the main trunk, the main tree, which is just double click it and it shows up over here and you can rename it this way. The reason why we're going to do it the first way is because we're going to be using this main view for a significant amount of time, and we don't want to have to keep jumping back and forth, and also that main view is too small of an area to really work with when we want a large area. So right click, show parameters, It's the exact same window, just a floating pane. Rename this statue. Enter. Close this. Do the background, right, show parameters. I'm going to call this background. Close this. We're going to do the background first. And we're going to add a general color. Hit Tab, DL, Color. Click the down arrow to expand this out for base. Drag the out color node over to the color. Those now are connected. And we're going to change this color. So right click, show parameters. Click on the little square. Change it to a basic gray. OK. Close this. This little hamburger menu is the collapsed state of the node. This is fully expanded. Three bars is fully expanded. Click once. This is fully collapsed. Twice is collapsed except for the nodes that are connected, the inputs and outputs that are connected. Do the same thing to the color. Now we can push these out of the way. The background is done. This is where the fun part kicks in, where we actually apply the UDIM textures to the statue. And you may have noticed those textures when you downloaded the USD Lite assets.zip file to get the Alembic file for the statue. There was a folder called textures, and in there were a ton of files, and all of those are used to build the UDIM based texture set for the statue. To start that process, hit Tab and type FIL, and the file node is kind of a shortcut to the process. It includes both the UV coordinate node, place 2D texture, as well as the file node, which allows us to load the actual texture images. We're going to rename this first. Right click, show parameter. Change the name to diffuse. Enter. And now we can add the image sets. Click the down arrow under image name. Click browse. And if you're not already in the texture folder, you can go up to parent. This is where we got our HDR and Alembic file from the last video. Click textures. As you can see, there's a series of bump maps, and the 1001, 102, 1003, all of those reference the UDIM files for the Alembic. Scroll down till you see diffuse color. Select 1001.tx. Hit accept. And then close the window. Click down arrow to expand out base. Drag out color to color. Now technically, this is fully connected. If we want to view to make sure it's working, both the background should be gray and the main diffuse color should already be applied. Hit the space bar, and there you go. The background is gray, the diffuse color is applied. Now I'm going to show you what's actually going on in the 3-to-light display. As you can see, it doesn't look right. Only half the hair is correct. The cub, all the textures are misplaced. And that's because there's one very important step. When you add a series of UDIM-based textures, you have to make one single change. So move this back out of the way. And we don't really have to jump back in yet, but double-click diffuse, and we can see this is the texture we added. And it actually is going through 1001, 1002, 1003, all the way to 29. But it doesn't know that it's UDIM based yet. So we actually have to highlight 1001, and this is case sensitive. If you do it lowercase, it won't work. I can show you. As you can see, it just really freaked out, has no idea what that means. So if you make it a capital U, capital D, capital I, capital M, and that's it. We have now successfully and correctly applied the UDIM-based textures for the statue. Really that simple. We're now going to apply a few other textures just to make it basically look a little better. Go back to the main node graph window, hit the spacebar, and now we're going to finish connecting the rest of our nodes. We're going to add a metallic, a bump, and a spec roughness. Collapse this down, and then collapse this down. Move the place 2D texture down a little bit because we're going to be running the out UV here into the UV coordinates for the other 3 nodes. Take the diffuse, Control C, Control V. Do this 3 times, Control V, Control V. We're going to rename these. This is going to be roughness. Metallic. And bump. And the reason why we wanted to create this diffuse node first and get everything set up correctly is because now all we have to do is just go in and change the initial starting UDIM texture map for each of those specific channels. Right click on roughness, show parameters, make it a little bigger so you can see the full line. If you already know the names, you can just change them directly, but it's also good to just view them. Scroll down to spec roughness. Select specular roughness 1001.tx. Hit accept. Remember to change 1001 to capital UDIM. And sometimes I'll just highlight that, Control C, so I don't have to keep typing that. Do the same thing to metallic. Or in this case, metalness, same thing. Highlight, Control V, and do the same thing to bump. Now you can add the additional channels if you want, and if it's warranted. But even in this limited example, I did testing and there was virtually no difference with the metalness or metallic channel. Full render with it on, full render with it off, very subtle. The hair is a little shinier and that's about it. So let's go in and change the bump. Select 1001TX, accept. Change that to UDIM. Close. We're going to have to expand these out so we can do the connections. Move these out of the way a little bit. Drag out UV. to UV coordinates. Now, diffuse is a color map, whereas roughness, metallic, and bump are all considered scalar or black and white maps. They often use the red channel to send information to the shader. What's interesting, and I don't know why, but the bump is considered color. And Arnold doesn't do that. I don't know of any other application that does that either. It's a black and white map. Not exactly sure why it comes out of the color, but it does. It just is what it is. Maybe somebody in comments can explain why. I have no idea why. But now we need to connect the out color R, which is the red channel, into the roughness channel for the shader. Collapse this to level 2. We're going to connect the metallic, out UV, out color R to metallic, collapse, and then the bump, expand it, out UV, and as you can see, the reason this is why we're working in full screen mode. It's just significantly easier. And this is only 2 materials. Imagine if you had 3, 4, 5 all connected. Can get a little overwhelming in such a small space on the main screen. Now this is where, if we expand down, bump normal displacement, the out color R only has a spot for intensity. As you can see from the render, one, it's a little dark. We're going to have to change the intensity of our HDRI, but also it's not doing anything. Let's go ahead and update our intensity of our HDRI first, just so we can see what's going on. I'm going to spacebar to jump out of this. If you hit the back on the node graph, it'll take you to the main screen. Double click Gaffer 3, go to intensity, change this to 3. Now it's nice and bright so we can see what's going on. And as you can see, that bump map didn't really do anything. But once we apply the bump map, you'll see what the difference it makes to the correct channel. Jump back into Network Material Create, maximize, zoom in a little bit, disconnect the out color R, and take color and put it into value. After it's rendered a little bit, we can actually see the texture from the bump map being applied. And every time I've ever applied a displacement or bump map, the default value is always extremely high. More often than not, I would say almost 100% of the time, you'll have to lower the value. I think this is done by default to let people know who are connecting up texture map channels that it's actually working. If it was too subtle, you might not get that visual feedback and you may think it's broken or something. But as we can see, this is definitely too strong. But this is technically all set up now. So we can close this or collapse it down. And now we have our materials set up. This is the statue material, named and connected. This is the background. It's visual here. Drag this over. This seems to always be the case. Hit the space bar. Now it's in position. Alt, right drag, shrink it down a little bit. We now have to change the bump map as it's a little too strong. As you can see, it looks very rough. In order to do that, we can just double click, maybe zoom in a little bit, our principled shader, and we'll see a lot of additional settings for the shader. And the one we're going to want to change is under bump normal displacement, the same channel we set up. Maybe collapse these a little bit. And in my testing, you want to change this, at least for me, to 0.015. Okay, it's been rendering for a few. The best area to see an indication that the bump is being applied is probably in the crease in the arm and then the shoulder area. It's still kind of difficult, and this is going to lead to a change that we're going to make it a little easier to see what's going on. If you remember, when we added the specular roughness, there were two sets. Don't know if you noticed. This is the matte version. The way spec roughness works is that the blacker the image, the shinier the reflection, or the more reflective it is, the more smooth the surface is. The whiter the image, the more occluded or rough the surface is. If you view this image set, the spec roughness image, in an image viewer, it'll be almost pure white, which gives it a very matte look. The image that we used in the beginning of the video used the inverse of that. And that's what we're going to apply now, which will make it nice and shiny. So we don't have to really maximize this because we already know what we're going to do. Alt right click to zoom in a little bit, middle mouse drag to reposition. And we don't have to actually even change the collapse state on this. We can just right click, show parameters, or we could double click. As you can see, it says specular roughness, UDIM.text. We actually want to change it to specular roughness inverse, INV. Browse, scroll down. See, there's the roughness maps. And there's the inverse, which these are, again, if you view them in an image viewer, are almost pure black, which will make them very shiny and reflective. Select roughness inverse 1001, accept. Remember to change the 1001 to capital UDIM. Enter. And as you can already tell, we're getting a reflective quality to the statue. Going to pause it for a few seconds to give it time to render. And now that it's had a chance to render for a few minutes, we can see that the bump map is appropriately applied and the 0.015 depth is a pretty good amount. You can make it a little stronger if you want to really bring out the detail, but we can see it in both legs, in the shoulder area, and a little bit along the cub. But that's basically it. That's the tutorial for how to apply UDIM-based textures to the statue to get the image that we had at the beginning. I hope this helps somebody out when they're trying to learn Katana and make the process a little easier to understand. Thank you for watching.